The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Cedar Valley like a gray blanket, reluctant to give way to the October sun. Marcus Whitfield guided his horse through the familiar path that led to the old smokehouse, a weathered building that had stood on his property for 3 generations. He wasn't expecting to find anything more than the usual signs of raccoons or perhaps a stray coyote seeking shelter from the previous night's rain. What he discovered instead would change everything. The heavy wooden door of the smokehouse hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the morning breeze. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had secured it just last week after the autumn storms, so finding it open immediately put him on alert. He dismounted his bay gelding, Thunder, and approached cautiously. Years of ranch life had taught him that unexpected changes usually meant trouble of one kind or another. The first sound that reached his ears was unusual, a soft, rhythmic gobbling, almost like a lullaby being hummed by some creature he couldn't quite identify. Marcus paused, his weathered hand resting on the doorframe as he tried to make sense of what he was hearing. The sound was gentle, soothing even, nothing like the aggressive calls he might expect from a wild turkey or the distressed cries of an injured animal. Pushing the door open wider, Marcus stepped into the dimly lit interior of the smokehouse. The familiar sense of aged wood and lingering hickory smoke filled his nostrils, but there was something else now, something warmer, more human. His eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, and what he saw made him freeze in place, his breath catching in his throat. In the far corner of the smokehouse, nestled among old blankets and what appeared to be a makeshift bed of hay, lay a young woman. Her auburn hair was tangled and damp, spread across a pillow that looked like it had been fashioned from a rolled-up coat. She was curled on her side, her body curved protectively around 2 small bundles that could only be babies. Even in sleep, her arms formed a protective circle around them as if shielding them from the world, even in unconsciousness. But what truly captured Marcus's attention was the large tom turkey standing sentinel beside the makeshift bed. The bird was magnificent, its bronze feathers catching what little light filtered through the smokehouse's small windows. Its head was tilted at an angle that suggested alertness, but there was nothing aggressive in its posture. Instead, it seemed to be watching over the sleeping woman and her children with an almost protective stance. As Marcus watched in amazement, the turkey let out another soft gobble, the same gentle sound he had heard from outside. The noise seemed to comfort the sleeping babies, who stirred only slightly before settling back into peaceful slumber. It was as if the bird understood its role as guardian and was performing it with remarkable tenderness. Marcus had seen many strange things in his 42 years of life, most of them here on the ranch that had been in his family since his great-grandfather first claimed the land. He had witnessed the birth of countless calves, nursed injured wildlife back to health, and even helped deliver human babies when the nearest doctor was too far away. But this scene before him was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, though exhaustion and what looked like recent hardship had etched lines around her eyes that suggested she had lived through more than her years should have required. Her clothes were wrinkled and worn, but clean, suggesting she had tried to maintain some dignity despite whatever circumstances had brought her to his smokehouse. Her hands, even in sleep, bore the calluses of someone accustomed to hard work, yet her fingers were long and elegant, speaking of a gentleness that hard times hadn't managed to erase. The babies, twins by all appearances, couldn't have been more than a few months old. They were swaddled in what looked like towels and a soft baby blanket that had seen better days but was clearly cherished. Their faces were peaceful in sleep, tiny features perfect and unmarked by the troubles that had apparently driven her mother to seek shelter in such an unlikely place. Marcus found himself torn between concern and fascination. His first instinct was to wake the woman, to find out who she was and how she had come to be here. His second was to let her sleep, recognizing the deep exhaustion that spoke of someone who had been pushed beyond their limits. The protective turkey complicated matters further. The bird was clearly not wild, its behavior too domesticated, too purposeful. It belonged to this woman somehow, was part of whatever story had led them all to his smokehouse. As he stood there debating his next move, one of the babies began to stir. The little one's face scrunched up in the way that every parent learns to recognize as the prelude to crying. But before the sound could escape, the turkey stepped closer and let out another soft gobble. The baby's expression relaxed immediately, and a tiny hand emerged from the swaddling to wave briefly in the air before settling back down into peaceful slumber. It was as if the bird understood its role as guardian and was performing it with remarkable tenderness. Marcus had seen many strange things in his 42 years of life, most of them here on the ranch that had been in his family since his great-grandfather first claimed the land. He had witnessed the birth of countless calves, nursed injured wildlife back to health, and even helped deliver human babies when the nearest doctor was too far away. But this scene before him was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, though exhaustion and what looked like recent hardship had etched lines around her eyes that suggested she had lived through more than her years should have required. Her clothes were wrinkled and worn, but clean, suggesting she had tried to maintain some dignity despite whatever circumstances had brought her to his smokehouse. Her hands, even in sleep, bore the calluses of someone accustomed to hard work, yet her fingers were long and elegant, speaking of a gentleness that hard times hadn't managed to erase. The babies, twins by all appearances, couldn't have been more than a few months old. They were swaddled in what looked like towels and a soft baby blanket that had seen better days but was clearly cherished. Their faces were peaceful in sleep, tiny features perfect and unmarked by the troubles that had apparently driven her mother to seek shelter in such an unlikely place. Marcus found himself torn between concern and fascination. His first instinct was to wake the woman, to find out who she was and how she had come to be here. His second was to let her sleep, recognizing the deep exhaustion that spoke of someone who had been pushed beyond their limits. The protective turkey complicated matters further. The bird was clearly not wild, its behavior too domesticated, too purposeful. It belonged to this woman somehow, was part of whatever story had led them all to his smokehouse. As he stood there debating his next move, one of the babies began to stir. The little one's face scrunched up in the way that every parent learns to recognize as the prelude to crying. But before the sound could escape, the turkey stepped closer and let out another soft gobble. The baby's expression relaxed immediately, and a tiny hand emerged from the swaddling to wave briefly in the air before settling back down into peaceful slumber. It was as if the bird understood its role as guardian and was performing it with remarkable tenderness. Marcus backed quietly out of the smokehouse, his mind racing. He needed to think, to plan his approach carefully. Waking a desperate mother with two babies could go badly if she perceived him as a threat. The turkey, despite its gentle behavior with the children, might react protectively if it sensed danger to its charges. And Marcus had learned long ago that people who ended up sleeping in barns and outbuildings usually had good reasons for avoiding more conventional shelter. He walked back to Thunder, his boots crunching softly on the frost-covered grass. The morning was growing brighter, and soon the autumn sun would burn away the mist entirely. The woman and her babies would likely wake with the rising temperature, and when they did, they would need food, water, and warmth. More than that, they would need someone to help them figure out their next step. Marcus had been alone on the Cedar Valley ranch for 3 years now, ever since his wife Emma had died in the car accident that still haunted his dreams. The silence of the big farmhouse had become both a comfort and a burden, filled with memories that sometimes felt like ghosts. He had grown accustomed to his solitary routine, to making decisions that affected only himself and his livestock. The idea of suddenly being responsible for 3 additional lives, 4 if I counted the turkey, should have been daunting. Instead, as he stood looking back at the smokehouse, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. The kind of clear, immediate need that left no room for doubt or hesitation. These people needed help, and he was in a position to provide it. Everything else could be figured out later. He mounted Thunder and rode quickly back to the house, his mind already making lists. Coffee, he would need fresh coffee. Breakfast for the woman. She looked like she hadn't eaten well in days. Formula or milk for the babies, though he wasn't sure of their age or dietary needs. Clean towels, blankets, maybe some of Emma's old clothes that he had never been able to bring himself to donate. The farmhouse felt different as he moved through it with renewed purpose. The kitchen, which had seen little use beyond his simple bachelor meals, suddenly seemed to remember its true function. Marcus started the coffee maker and began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator and pantry. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread from the batch that he had baked 3 days ago. Simple, hearty food that would provide the kind of sustenance someone in the woman's condition would need. As he worked, his thoughts kept returning to the turkey. In all his years of ranching, he had never seen such behavior from a bird. Turkeys could be protective of their young, certainly, but this was different. The bird was acting more like a loyal dog than poultry, exhibiting an intelligence and emotional connection that challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about farm animals. The coffee finished brewing, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Marcus poured some into a large thermos, then filled another container with fresh water. He packed the food into a basket, adding plates, utensils, and napkins. The babies would need attention too, so he searched through the house until he found the box of baby supplies that had been meant for the child he and Emma had planned to have someday. The supplies had been gathered with such hope, such anticipation, and finding them now felt like a sign that they were finally meant to serve their intended purpose. With everything packed, Marcus made his way back to the smokehouse. The sun was higher now, and he could hear sounds of movement from within the old building. A baby's cry, soft and brief, followed by a woman's gentle voice speaking in soothing tones. The turkey's answering gobble was barely audible, but Marcus caught it, and he found himself smiling at the strange little family's interaction. He approached the door slowly, making enough noise to announce his presence without seeming threatening. When he reached the entrance, he called out softly, "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Whitfield. This is my property, and I'd like to help if you'll let me." The sounds from inside the smokehouse stopped abruptly. Marcus could practically feel the tension that followed, the sudden alertness of someone who had been caught in a vulnerable position. He waited, giving the woman time to assess the situation and decide how to respond. When her voice came, it was cautious, but not hostile. "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to trespass. We'll leave right away." "No need for that," Marcus replied, setting the basket down where she could see it through the partially open door. "I brought some breakfast and coffee. Figured you and the little ones might be hungry." There was a long pause, and Marcus could hear quiet discussion, though he couldn't make out the words. Finally, the woman spoke again. "That's very kind of you, but we can't pay for anything right now." "Wasn't asking for payment," Marcus said simply. "Sometimes folks need help, and sometimes other folks are in a position to provide it. No strings attached." Another pause, shorter this time. The door opened wider, and Marcus got his first clear look at the woman in daylight. She was even younger than he had initially thought, probably no more than 23 or 24. Her green eyes held a wariness that spoke of difficult experiences, but there was strength there too, a determination that had clearly carried her through whatever trials had brought her here. The babies were awake now, held securely in her arms. They were indeed twins, a boy and a girl by the look of their different colored blankets. Both had the woman's distinctive auburn hair, though theirs was still soft and fine with infancy. Their eyes were bright and alert, taking in the new face with the fearless curiosity of the very young. The turkey stood slightly behind the woman, its head moving back and forth as it assessed Marcus. There was intelligence in the bird's dark eyes, and Marcus had the distinct impression he was being measured and judged. After a moment, the turkey relaxed slightly, though it remained close enough to intervene if necessary. "I'm Rebecca," the woman said finally. "Rebecca Chen. These are my children, David and Sophie, and this," she gestured to the turkey with something that might have been affection, "is Cornelius." Marcus nodded gravely, as if being introduced to a turkey was the most natural thing in the world. "Pleased to meet you all. I hope Cornelius doesn't mind sharing his space with some breakfast." Rebecca's expression softened slightly at his matter-of-fact acceptance of her unusual companion. "He's very protective, but he's gentle with the babies. I know it seems strange, but he's been with us through everything." "Nothing strange about loyalty," Marcus replied. "I've known plenty of people who could learn from animals about being faithful to those they care about." He picked up the basket and stepped back, giving Rebecca space to come outside if she chose. "There's fresh coffee in the thermos, and it's getting warm enough that the babies might enjoy some fresh air. No pressure, though. You're welcome to stay right where you are if that feels safer." Rebecca looked down at her children, then back at Marcus. Something in his steady demeanor, his calm acceptance of their situation, seemed to help her make a decision. She stepped out of the smokehouse, Cornelius following close behind. In the morning light, Marcus could see that she was thinner than she should be, her clothes hanging loose in a way that suggested recent weight loss. The babies, however, looked healthy and well cared for, evidence of a mother who had sacrificed her own needs for those of her children. "When did you last eat?" Marcus asked gently, unpacking the basket and setting out plates on a nearby stump that would serve as a table. Rebecca's cheeks flushed slightly. "Yesterday morning.
There was a diner in the last town, and they let me work for a meal. The babies had formula yesterday evening. Marcus felt his jaw tighten at the thought of this young mother going without food while caring for 2 infants, but he kept his expression neutral. Getting angry about her situation wouldn't help anyone, and it might make her defensive enough to leave before he could provide real assistance. "Well then, you're just in time for breakfast," he said, filling a plate with scrambled eggs, bacon, and buttered toast. The aromas seemed to have an immediate effect on Rebecca, who swallowed hard and looked away as if trying to control her hunger. "Please," Marcus said, offering her the plate. "It'll get cold if you wait much longer." Rebecca accepted the food with obvious reluctance, clearly uncomfortable with accepting charity. But hunger won out over pride, and she began to eat with the careful control of someone who had learned not to waste a single bite. Marcus busied himself with preparing a second plate and pouring coffee, giving her space to eat without feeling watched. Cornelius had positioned himself where he could observe both Rebecca and Marcus, his head tilting from side to side as he monitored the situation. When Marcus offered him some torn pieces of bread, the turkey accepted them graciously, eating with the same careful precision that Rebecca was displaying. "How long have you had Cornelius?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the unusual bond between woman and bird. Rebecca smiled for the first time since she had met him, and the expression transformed her entire face. "About 8 months now. I found him as a chick, abandoned by the side of the road. Someone had probably lost him during transport, and he was nearly dead from exposure and dehydration. David and Sophie weren't born yet, but I was living in a small cabin then, and I nursed him to health." She paused to take another bite, then continued. "He imprinted on me, I think. The veterinarian I took him to said it happens sometimes with birds who are rescued very young. He's been my constant companion ever since. When I had to leave the cabin, he came with us. I couldn't abandon him after he had trusted me to take care of him." Marcus nodded gravely, as understanding more than Rebecca might have expected. He had raised enough orphaned animals to know how powerful the bond could become between rescuer and rescued. "He's a good bird. Smart, too. Not many turkeys would have the sense to help watch over babies the way this one does." "Or he knows they're important to me," Rebecca said, looking down at David and Sophie, who were beginning to fuss slightly in their blankets. "Sometimes I think he understands more than most people do about what really matters." As if summoned by their conversation, Cornelius approached the babies and let out one of his soft gobbles. Both infants immediately calmed, their eyes tracking toward the familiar sound. It was such a tender interaction that Marcus felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "That's remarkable," he said quietly. "I've never seen anything quite like it." Rebecca's expression grew more guarded again, as if she had revealed too much and was now regretting her openness. "We should probably get going soon. I don't want to impose on your kindness any longer than necessary." "Where are you headed?" West," Rebecca said vaguely. "There are opportunities in the bigger cities, places where someone with my skills might find work." "What kind of work?" Rebecca hesitated, then decided that honesty was her best option. "I was a veterinarian technician before the babies came. I'm good with animals, and I understand medical procedures, but most clinics want someone who can work full-time, and finding someone to watch the babies." "Childcare for twins." She trailed off, the impossibility of her situation clear in her voice. Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fit together. A young single mother with valuable skills, traveling with infant twins and a pet turkey, sleeping in outbuildings and working for meals. Whatever had happened to bring her to this point, it had been sudden and devastating enough to leave her with few resources and fewer options. "The nearest city with veterinary clinics is still 200 miles west," he said carefully. "That's a long way to travel with babies, especially with winter coming on." Rebecca's shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of her circumstances was becoming too heavy to bear. "I know, but I have to try. The children deserve better than this." Looking at her in that moment, Marcus saw something that reminded him of the wild animals he sometimes found on his property, creatures that were exhausted and desperate, but still fighting for survival, still determined to protect their young no matter what the cost. There was a nobility in such determination,
but also a tragic futility when the odds were simply too overwhelming. "What if I told you there might be another option?" Marcus said slowly, the words forming even as he thought them. "Something that wouldn't require traveling 200 miles with twins and a turkey." Rebecca looked up sharply, hope and suspicion warring in her green eyes. "What kind of option?" Marcus set down his coffee cup and met her gaze steadily. "I've got a ranch here that's been in my family for 3 generations. It's a good operation, profitable enough, but it's been just me running it for the past few years. I could use help, especially someone who understands animals and medical procedures." He paused, seeing the way Rebecca was processing his words, the careful evaluation happening behind her eyes. "The pay would be fair, and there's a small cabin on the property that could house you and the children. It has its own well, electricity, phone line. Nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry and safe." "You don't know anything about me," Rebecca said quietly. "I could be a criminal or unstable or any number of things that would make me a terrible employee." Marcus smiled slightly. "Well, let's see. You're traveling with 2 babies who are clearly healthy and well cared for despite difficult circumstances. You rescued and raised an orphan turkey who's now so devoted to you that he helps guard your children. You're skilled enough in veterinary medicine that you found work in that field, and you're resourceful enough to have survived whatever brought you here. Most importantly, you've managed to maintain your dignity and your children's welfare even when reduced to sleeping in strangers' outbuildings." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "Rebecca, I've been ranching for more than 20 years. I've learned to judge character pretty quickly, and everything I see tells me you're exactly the kind of person I'd want working with my animals and living on my land." Rebecca was quiet for a long time, looking down at her children and then at Cornelius, who had settled beside her as if offering his own form of support. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Why would you do this? You don't owe us anything." Marcus thought of Emma, of the dreams they had shared for this ranch and the family they had hoped to build here. He thought of the 3 years of loneliness that had followed her death, the way the house had echoed with emptiness despite his efforts to fill it with work and routine. And he thought of the scene he had discovered that morning in the smokehouse, the image of a young mother and her children being protected by a gentle turkey, all of them finding shelter in the most unlikely of places. "Sometimes," he said finally, "life puts people exactly where they need to be, even when none of them realize it at the time. I think maybe that's what happened here." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for signs of deception or hidden motives. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because some of the tension left her shoulders. "What would my responsibilities be?" she asked, and Marcus felt his heart lift at the practical tone of her question. She was considering it, actually thinking about staying. "General animal care, helping with veterinary needs when they arise, maybe some assistance during calving season in the spring. Nothing that would require you to be away from the babies for long periods. There's enough flexibility in ranch work that you could bring them with you most of the time, at least until they're older." He gestured toward Cornelius, who was preening his feathers in the morning sun. "I'm assuming your friend there would be part of the package." Rebecca actually smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I'm afraid so. He doesn't do well when separated from us for any length of time." "Good," Marcus said firmly. "A ranch can always use another guardian, especially one who's already proven his dedication to protecting what matters most." As if he understood that he was being discussed favorably, Cornelius raised his head and let out a soft, melodious gobble that sounded almost like a song. David and Sophie, who had been growing restless in their mother's arms, immediately settled at the familiar sound. Rebecca looked down at her children, then back at Marcus. "If I said yes, if I agreed to try this, it would have to be with the understanding that I'm not looking for charity. I want to earn my place here, to contribute something valuable in exchange for what you're offering." "Wouldn't have it any other way.
This is a working ranch, and I need someone who's willing to work. The cabin comes with the job, but it's not a gift. You'll earn it every day through your efforts." Rebecca stood slowly, adjusting her hold on the twins. "Could I see the cabin before I decide?" "Of course," Marcus said, rising and beginning to pack up the breakfast dishes. "It's about a quarter-mile from the main house, tucked back in a grove of oak trees, has a good view of the pond and the eastern pastures." As they walked toward the cabin, Cornelius following at a dignified pace behind them, Marcus found himself hoping that Rebecca would like what she saw. The small house had been built for his grandfather's foreman back in the 1950s, and while it had been updated over the years, it retained a cozy, welcoming atmosphere that had always appealed to Marcus. It would be perfect for a young mother and her children, offering independence while still being close enough to the main house for safety and support. The cabin sat exactly in the spot Marcus had described, surrounded by mature oak trees that provided shade in summer and shelter from winter winds. A small porch ran across the front, complete with a swing that Marcus's grandmother had installed decades ago. The exterior was weathered cedar siding that had aged to a soft gray, giving the whole structure a timeless quality that seemed to belong to the landscape rather than imposing upon it. Marcus unlocked the front door and stepped aside to let Rebecca enter first. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a living room that flowed into a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that had been there since the cabin was built. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, casting warm patterns on the hardwood floors. "The furniture comes with it," Marcus explained, as Rebecca walked slowly through the rooms. "Most of it's been here for years, but it's all solid and comfortable. There's a wood-burning stove for heat, plus electric baseboard heaters for backup. The kitchen appliances all work, and there's a washer and dryer in the utility closet." Rebecca moved through the space with growing wonder, touching surfaces as if she couldn't quite believe they were real. When she reached the larger bedroom, she stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the queen-size bed with its colorful quilt and the antique dresser that had been her grandmother's. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's more than I dared hope for." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest at her obvious appreciation. "There's a crib in the smaller bedroom that belonged to my cousin's children. It's been well maintained, but if you'd prefer something different, we can arrange that." Rebecca walked to the window that looked out over the pond, where a family of ducks was paddling peacefully in the morning sun. "What's the timeline? If I agree to this, when would you need me to start?" "Whenever you're ready. Today if you want, tomorrow, next week. The animals need care regardless, but I've been managing alone this long. A few more days won't make a difference." Rebecca turned to him and then back to the property spreading out before them. First a few minutes, she just stood there in silence, the odds against her feeling still daunting. But then she took a deep breath and said the words that Marcus had most wanted to hear.
From the window, and Marcus was struck again by the strength he saw in her face. This was a woman who had endured hardship but hadn't been broken by it, who had somehow maintained her essential self despite circumstances that might have crushed someone else. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "It's a generous offer, more generous than I have any right to expect. But it's also a big decision, especially with the children to consider." "Of course," Marcus agreed. "Take all the time you need. You're welcome to stay in the smokehouse tonight if you want, or I can set up the cabin for you to try it out. Whatever feels right." Rebecca looked down at David and Sophie, who had fallen asleep in her arms despite all the movement and new surroundings. "They seem comfortable here," she observed. "Maybe that's a sign." As if summoned by her words, Cornelius appeared in the doorway, having followed them through the cabin. He surveyed the living room with what appeared to be approval, then settled himself in a sunny spot near the window where he could keep watch over both the interior and the view outside. "I think Cornelius has made his decision," Marcus said with amusement. "He seems to approve of the accommodations." Rebecca laughed, the sound light and musical in the quiet cabin. "He's always been good at finding the best spots. Maybe I should trust his judgment."
The moment stretched between them, comfortable and filled with possibility. Marcus found himself hoping more than he had allowed himself to hope for anything in years. Not just for the help with the ranch, though, that would certainly be valuable, but for the sense of purpose and life that Rebecca and her children would bring to a place that had felt too empty for too long. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said, her expression growing serious again. "I need you to know that David and Sophie's father isn't in the picture. It's not a situation where you need to worry about an angry ex-husband showing up and causing problems, but there might be people looking for us. Not dangerous people," she added quickly, seeing concern flash across Marcus's face, "but people who think they know what's best for me and the children, who might try to convince me to make different choices." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding more than she might realize about the pressure that well-meaning people could apply when they disagreed with someone's decisions. "This is your home, if you choose it to be. Anyone who has a problem with that will have to go through me first." The simple declaration seemed to lift a weight from Rebecca's shoulders. For the first time since he had found her in the smokehouse, she looked truly relaxed, as if the constant vigilance she had been maintaining was finally unnecessary. "In that case," she said, meeting his eyes directly, "I think we'd like to stay, if the offer is still open." Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen for the first time in 3 years. "The offer is definitely still open. Welcome to Cedar Valley Ranch, Rebecca Chen. I think you and your family are going to like it here." As they stood in the sunlit cabin, surrounded by the promise of new beginnings and second chances, Cornelius let out a soft, contented gobble that seemed to seal the agreement. Outside, the ducks continued their peaceful progression across the pond, and the autumn sun climbed higher in a sky that suddenly seemed full of infinite possibilities. Rebecca had found sanctuary, Marcus had found purpose, and somewhere in the gentle chaos of it all, a new kind of family was beginning to shake tape. It wasn't what any of them had planned, but as Rebecca had already learned, the best things in life often came from the most unexpected places. The smokehouse had served its purpose, sheltering a desperate mother and her children in their darkest hour. But the real story was just beginning, written in morning light and turkey songs, in the promise of honest work and genuine care, and in the growing certainty that sometimes the most unlikely combinations create the strongest foundations for hope. 3 weeks had passed since Rebecca and her family settled into the cabin at Cedar Valley Ranch, and the rhythm of their new life was beginning to feel natural. The autumn mornings were crisp now, painting the oak leaves in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and Rebecca had discovered that she loved watching the sunrise from the cabin's front porch, while David and Sophie had their morning feeding. Cornelius had adapted to ranch life with surprising grace, establishing himself as an unofficial guardian of the entire property. Marcus often found the turkey patrolling the fence lines or standing watch near the barn, his keen eyes alert for any signs of trouble. The other animals had accepted him with varying degrees of curiosity and respect, though the chickens maintained a cautious distance from their larger, more dignified cousin. Rebecca's first day of actual work had been nerve-wracking and exhilarating. Marcus had started her off slowly, introducing her to the ranch's permanent residents, a dozen head of cattle, 3 horses, a small flock of sheep, and an assortment of chickens and goats. She had expected to feel rusty after months away from veterinary work, but her hands seemed to remember their training automatically as she examined animals and assisted with routine care. What she hadn't expected was how much she would enjoy the work itself. In the clinical setting of her previous job, she had often felt removed from the animals she treated, focused more on procedures and protocols than on building relationships. Here on the ranch, she was getting to know each animal as an individual, learning their personalities and preferences, understanding how they fit into the larger ecosystem of the operation. The cattle were Marcus's pride and joy, a mixed herd of Angus and Hereford crosses that he had been selectively breeding for hardiness and temperament. Rebecca had been amazed by how gentle these massive creatures could be, how they seemed to sense her nervousness during their first encounters and adjusted their behavior accordingly. Within a week, she was moving confidently among them, checking for signs of illness or injury, assisting with feed distribution, and even helping to repair fencing when necessary. The horses presented a different challenge entirely. Thunder, Marcus's bay gelding, had been polite but reserved during their introduction, clearly protective of his status as the ranch's primary mount. The two mares, Daisy and Belle, had been more welcoming, especially once they realized that Rebecca often carried treats in her pockets. But it was the youngest horse, a 3-year-old quarter horse named Storm, that had captured Rebecca's heart completely. Storm had been born on the ranch, raised by Marcus from a foal, but he had always been skittish around strangers. Previous ranch hands had found him difficult to handle, too sensitive and unpredictable for reliable work. Marcus had been considering selling him to someone with more time for intensive training, but something about Rebecca's approach had changed everything. Maybe it was her quiet patience, or the way she never rushed her interactions with the animals, but Storm had responded to her from their first meeting. Within days, he was following her around like a large, devoted dog, nickering softly when he saw her approaching and standing perfectly still while she groomed him or checked his hooves. Marcus had watched this developing relationship with growing amazement and something that felt suspiciously like pride. He had known that Rebecca was skilled with animals, but seeing her natural gift for communication and trust-building had reinforced his conviction that bringing her to the ranch had been the right decision for everyone involved. The mornings had settled into a comfortable routine. Rebecca would rise early, feed the twins, and then join Marcus for coffee and breakfast in the main house kitchen. They would discuss the day's priorities, check weather reports, and review any concerns about individual animals. Cornelius would often join them on the porch, contributing his own soft commentary to their conversations in a way that had stopped seeming strange and started feeling perfectly normal. After breakfast, Rebecca would settle David and Sophie in a portable playpen that Marcus had found in the attic, a relic from his own childhood that had been carefully preserved by his mother. The twins seemed to enjoy watching the ranch activities from their mobile vantage point, and Cornelius had appointed himself the official guardian during work hours, positioning himself where he could observe both the babies and whatever tasks Rebecca was performing. The work itself varied depending on season and the needs of the animals. Some days were spent in routine maintenance, checking water troughs, inspecting fencing, cleaning stalls, and monitoring the health of the herd. Other days brought more complex challenges: a cow with a minor injury that needed attention, a ewe showing signs of pregnancy complications, or equipment that required repair or replacement. Rebecca had proven herself capable of handling whatever arose, her veterinary training providing a solid foundation for ranch medicine that often required quick thinking and creative solutions. She had successfully treated a case of pink eye in the cattle, assisted with a difficult birth in the sheep flock, and even helped Marcus repair a broken water pump using nothing but basic tools and determination. But it was the quieter moments that had begun to mean the most to both of them. The conversations that developed while working side by side, the shared satisfaction of a job well done, the comfortable silences that spoke of growing trust and understanding. Marcus found himself looking forward to these interactions with an anticipation that surprised him, while Rebecca discovered that she was beginning to think of the ranch not just as a temporary refuge, but as a place where she might actually build a future. The first real test of their partnership had come during Rebecca's second week when a late-season storm had swept through the valley with unexpected intensity. The Weather Service had predicted light rain, but what they got instead was a full-scale tempest, with driving winds, hail, and temperatures that dropped 30 degrees in less than 2 hours. Marcus had been checking the cattle in the far pasture when the storm hit, and by the time he made it back to the barn, Rebecca had already moved into action. She had secured all the smaller animals in sheltered areas, moved the horses into the barn, and even managed to get most of the chickens into their coop before the worst of the weather arrived. The twins were safe in the main house with Cornelius standing guard, and Rebecca was in the process of checking that all the water troughs had adequate overflow drainage. Working together in the driving rain, they had managed to minimize the storm's impact on the ranch operations. A few fence posts had been damaged by falling branches, and one section of the chicken coop roof would need repair, but all the animals were safe and accounted for. As they stood in the barn afterward, soaked to the skin but triumphant, Marcus had felt a surge of gratitude that went far beyond simple appreciation for Rebecca's help. She had acted not like an employee following orders, but like a true partner who understood the stakes and was willing to do whatever was necessary to protect what they had built together. In that moment, Marcus had realized that his feelings for Rebecca were evolving beyond professional respect or even friendship, though he was careful to keep that realization to himself. Rebecca, for her part, had felt the same shift in their dynamic. The crisis had stripped away the careful politeness that had characterized their early interactions, revealing the deeper compatibility that existed between them. They worked well together, anticipated each other's needs, and shared a commitment to the welfare of the animals that transcended any formal job description. But with this growing closeness came new complications. Rebecca was acutely aware that her situation at the ranch, while wonderful in many ways, was still fundamentally precarious. She was an employee, dependent on Marcus's goodwill and generosity for the security of her children. The cabin, the job, the sense of belonging she was beginning to feel, all of it could disappear if circumstances changed or if Marcus decided that the arrangement was no longer working for him. This awareness made her cautious about reading too much into their friendly interactions or the way his eyes seemed to linger on her face during their morning conversations. She had made the mistake before of confusing kindness with something deeper, and the consequences had been devastating. David and Sophie's father had been charming and attentive during their brief relationship, right until the moment he learned about the pregnancy and disappeared from her life entirely. The memory of that abandonment and the months of struggle that had followed made Rebecca determined to maintain appropriate boundaries, no matter how comfortable she felt with Marcus. She could not afford to mistake professional courtesy for personal interest, especially when her children's welfare was at stake. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling with his own internal conflicts. The attraction he felt for Rebecca had been immediate, and had only grown stronger as he got to know her better. She was intelligent, capable, and beautiful, but more than that, she brought a warmth and vitality to the ranch that had been missing since Emma's death. Watching her with the animals, seeing her gentle competence with her children, observing the way she had seamlessly integrated into ranch life, it all spoke to qualities that Marcus found deeply appealing. But he was also aware of the power imbalance in their relationship and the vulnerability of Rebecca's position. She had come to him desperate and homeless, and he had offered her shelter and employment. Any romantic overture on his part could be interpreted as pressure or coercion, regardless of his intentions. The last thing he wanted was to make Rebecca feel that her job security was contingent on anything other than her excellent work performance. So, they maintained their careful dance of friendship and professional cooperation, each aware of the growing undercurrent of attraction, but neither willing to be the first to acknowledge it openly. Their conversations remained focused on ranch business and general topics, though both noticed the way these discussions seemed to stretch longer each day, covering everything from philosophy to favorite books to dreams for the future. The twins, oblivious to the adult complications surrounding them, continued to thrive in their new environment. David had begun to show signs of his developing personality, smiling readily at familiar faces and showing a particular fascination with the movement of the animals. Sophie was more reserved but intensely observant, her large eyes tracking everything that happened around her with serious concentration. Both children had formed an obvious attachment to Marcus, who seemed equally devoted to them. Rebecca often found him talking to them during breaks in the workday, explaining ranch operations in the same serious tone he might use with an adult. David and Sophie appeared to enjoy these one-sided conversations, responding with coos and smiles that made Marcus's face light up with genuine pleasure. Cornelius remained their most devoted guardian, rarely straying more than a few yards from wherever the twins were located. His protective instincts had expanded to include the entire ranch family, and he had appointed himself the official greeter for any visitors to the property. The mail carrier had been startled initially by the sight of a large turkey approaching his vehicle, but he had quickly learned to appreciate Cornelius's friendly demeanor and reliable presence. The routine of ranch life had provided Rebecca with the stability she had been seeking for months, but it had also given her time to think about her future in ways that went beyond simple survival. For the first time since David and Sophie were born, she was able to consider possibilities that extended beyond meeting their immediate needs for food and shelter. She found herself imagining what it would be like to stay at the ranch permanently, to watch her children grow up surrounded by animals and open spaces, to continue developing her skills as both a veterinary technician and a ranch hand. The work was physically demanding, but deeply satisfying, and she was learning new things every day. Marcus was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough, willing to explain not just how to do something, but why it needed to be done. More than that, she was beginning to feel like she belonged somewhere again. The ranch had a sense of continuity and purpose that appealed to her, a connection to the land and the seasons that felt both grounding and inspiring. She loved the way the work changed with the weather and the needs of the animals, the way each day brought new challenges and small victories. But underlying these positive feelings was a persistent worry about the temporary nature of her situation. Marcus had been more than generous, but she was still essentially a charity case, dependent on his goodwill for everything that mattered in her life. What would happen if
He decided to sell the ranch, or if he met someone he wanted to marry, or if he simply grew tired of having a single mother and her entourage, disrupting his solitary lifestyle? These concerns came to a head during Rebecca's 4th week at the ranch, when a phone call changed everything she thought she understood about her situation. She had been in the barn grooming Storm when Marcus appeared with his cell phone in hand, his expression troubled. "Rebecca, there's a call for you," he said, holding out the device. "Someone says they're from social services in Colorado." Rebecca felt her blood turn to ice as she accepted the phone. She had been expecting this call for weeks, dreading it while hoping it might never come. With trembling fingers, she lifted the device to her ear. "Rebecca Chen speaking?" she said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. "Miss Chen, this is Patricia Valdez from Colorado Department of Human Services. We've been trying to locate you regarding the welfare check that was requested for your children." Rebecca's worst fears were being realized. Someone had reported her to Child Services. Probably her former landlord, or maybe Thomas Reeves, David and Sophie's father, who had been making threatening noises about custody ever since she had refused his demands that she return to him. The bureaucratic machinery was in motion now, and she knew from bitter experience how difficult it could be to stop once it had started. "I understand you're concerned about my children's welfare," Rebecca said carefully, aware that Marcus was listening and trying to keep her voice calm. "But I can assure you that David and Sophie are being well cared for. They're healthy, safe, and loved." "I'm sure they are, Miss Chen," Patricia Valdez replied, in the tone of someone who had heard similar assurances countless times before. "But we do need to verify their current living situation and conduct a proper assessment. The report we received suggested that you might be homeless and unable to provide adequate care." Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the careful stability she had built over the past month beginning to crumble. "That's not accurate anymore. We have a home now, and I have steady employment. The children are thriving." "I'm glad to hear that," the social worker said, though her tone remained professionally skeptical. "However, we still need to complete our investigation. I'll need your current address so we can schedule a home visit within the next few days." Rebecca's mind raced as she tried to figure out how to handle this crisis. A social services visit could destroy everything she had built at the ranch, regardless of how well things were actually going. Government agencies had their own definitions of suitable living arrangements, and a cabin on a remote ranch might not meet their standards, especially for a single mother with twins. More than that, she was terrified of what Marcus's reaction would be to having social services investigating his property and his employees. He had taken her in as an act of kindness, not because he wanted to become involved in a legal battle over child custody. This kind of complication could easily convince him that hiring her had been a mistake. "Could I call you back with that information?" Rebecca asked, buying herself time to think. "I need to confirm a few details about my address." "Of course," Patricia said, "but I do need to hear from you by the end of business tomorrow. If we can't establish contact and schedule the visit, we'll have to escalate our response accordingly." The implicit threat was clear: cooperate or face the possibility of having David and Sophie removed from her care while the investigation proceeded. Rebecca had heard horror stories about children being placed in foster care during these types of proceedings, sometimes for months while bureaucratic wheels turned slowly. "I understand," Rebecca said. "I'll call you back tomorrow with the information you need." She ended the call and handed the phone back to Marcus, whose expression had grown increasingly concerned as he listened to her side of the conversation. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of this new crisis settling between them like a physical presence. "Rebecca," Marcus said finally, his voice gentle but serious, "what's going on? What kind of trouble are you in?" Rebecca felt tears threatening as she tried to find words to explain the situation without revealing how precarious her position truly was. "Someone reported me to child services, probably because we were homeless for a while after I left Colorado. They want to do a home visit to make sure David and Sophie are being properly cared for." Marcus's jaw tightened, and Rebecca saw a flash of anger in his eyes that she didn't think was directed at her. "On what grounds? Anyone can see that your children are healthy and happy." "It doesn't matter what's actually true," Rebecca said, her voice breaking slightly. "What matters is what gets reported and how it looks on paper. A single mother traveling with infant twins, no permanent address, no steady income. It all adds up to a risk profile that triggers automatic investigations." She sank down onto a hay bale, suddenly exhausted by the effort of maintaining her composure. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I should have told you this might happen. I should have warned you that bringing us here could involve you in legal complications." To her surprise, Marcus sat down beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "You've got nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "You're a good mother, and anyone who spends 5 minutes around your children can see that they're loved and well cared for. If some bureaucrat wants to waste everyone's time proving what's already obvious, then that's what we'll do." Rebecca looked at him in amazement. "We? You think I'm going to let you face this alone?" he asked, as if the idea was absurd. "This is your home now, Rebecca. These children are part of this ranch family. Whatever it takes to protect that, we'll figure it out together." The simple declaration hit Rebecca like a physical blow, so unexpected and generous that she felt her carefully maintained emotional control finally crack. Tears she had been holding back for weeks spilled over, carrying with them all the fear and stress and desperate hope she had been carrying since the moment she found herself homeless and alone with 2 babies to protect. Marcus didn't try to stop her tears or offer empty assurances. Instead, he simply sat beside her in the barn, letting her cry while the familiar sounds of ranch life continued around them. Cornelius appeared from wherever he had been exploring and positioned himself protectively nearby, as if sensing that his human family was in distress. When Rebecca's tears finally subsided, she felt lighter somehow, as if the act of finally sharing her burden had made it more manageable. What if they decide the cabin isn't suitable? What if they think a ranch is too dangerous for babies, or that I'm not capable of providing adequate care on my own? Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through the implications of her questions. Then, we make sure they see something that convinces them otherwise. We show them 2 healthy,
Happy babies being raised in a safe, stable environment by a mother who's dedicated to their welfare. We show them a support system that includes not just you, but me and this entire ranch operation. Rebecca looked at him uncertainly. What are you saying? Marcus met her eyes directly, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it before. Rebecca, I know this might seem sudden, and I know our situation is complicated, but the truth is, these past few weeks have been the best I've had since Emma died. Not just because of the help with the ranch, though that's been invaluable. It's because of the life and warmth you and the children have brought to this place. I care about you, about all of you. David and Sophie feel like family to me already, and Cornelius has become as much a part of this ranch as any animal I've ever owned. If there was a way to make sure you never had to worry about losing this home, never had to face another crisis like this alone, I'd want to take it. Rebecca stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Marcus, what are you asking me? I'm asking if you—
Consider marrying me, he said simply. Not because it's romantic or because we're madly in love, though I won't lie and say I don't have feelings for you, but because it would give you and the children legal protection, financial security, and a permanent place to belong. It would make you an equal partner in this ranch, instead of just an employee. The proposal hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Rebecca felt her mind reeling as she tried to process the magnitude of what Marcus was offering. Marriage to a man she respected and was growing to care for deeply. Permanent security for her children. A real home instead of temporary shelter. But it was also terrifying in its implications. Marriage was supposed to be about love and shared dreams, not practical arrangements designed to satisfy social workers. What if Marcus came to resent the bargain he was proposing? What if she could never live up to the memory of his first wife? What if she was simply trading one form of dependence for another? Marcus, she said slowly, I can't ask you to make that kind of sacrifice for us. Marriage should be about more than solving problems or providing legal protection. Who says it would be a sacrifice? Marcus asked gently. Rebecca, I've been alone for 3 years. I'd convinced myself that I was content with that solitude, that I didn't need anyone else in my life. But having you here, seeing what this place could be with a family living in it again, it showed me how empty my life had become. He reached out and took her hands, his calloused palms warm against her skin. I'm not saying we'd have to rush into anything. We could start with a simple legal marriage, something that gives you the protection you need for the social services visit. Whatever develops between us personally could happen naturally, without pressure or expectations. Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. The practical side of her knew that Marcus's proposal offered everything she had been hoping for: security, stability, and a chance for her children to grow up in a loving environment. But the woman who had been abandoned by David and Sophie's father was terrified of trusting another man with her heart and her future. What about Emma? She asked quietly. How can you even think about marrying someone else when you're still grieving for your wife? Marcus was silent for a long time, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Emma's been gone for 3 years, Rebecca. I'll always love her memory, but I'm tired of living in the past. She wouldn't have wanted me to spend the rest of my life alone, and I think she would have liked you. She always said this ranch needed children's laughter to make it complete. He squeezed her hands gently. You're not a replacement for Emma, and I'm not asking you to be. You're Rebecca Chen, an amazing woman who's faced incredible challenges and somehow managed to keep her integrity and her hope intact. You deserve a chance at happiness, and so did David and Sophie. Rebecca felt fresh tears threatening as she struggled with the biggest decision of her life. Everything logical told her to accept Marcus's proposal, to grab this opportunity for security with both hands and never let go. But her heart was terrified of making another mistake, of trusting the wrong person and paying the price for years to come. I need time to think, she said finally. This is too big a decision to make in the heat of the moment.
especially with the social services call hanging over us. Marcus nodded, though he could see disappointment flicker across his features. Of course. Take all the time you need. Whatever you decide, I'll support your choice. Rebecca stood up from the hay bale, her legs unsteady beneath her. I should get back to the children. They'll be waking up from their nap soon, and I need to figure out how to handle the call tomorrow. Rebecca, Marcus called as she reached the barn door. She turned back to look at him, and the expression on his face was so gentle and hopeful that it made her chest ache. Whatever happens with social services, whatever you decide about my proposal, I want you to know that you and the children will always have a place here. That's not contingent on anything except my promise to you as a friend. Rebecca nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and walked back toward the cabin with her mind churning and her heart in chaos. Behind her, she could hear Cornelius following, his quiet presence a comfort as she tried to make sense of everything that had changed in the space of a single phone call. The social services crisis had forced into the open feelings and possibilities that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. Now she had to decide not just how to handle the immediate threat to her children's welfare, but whether she was brave enough to accept the kind of happiness that Marcus was offering. As she reached the cabin and heard David and Sophie beginning to stir from their afternoon nap, Rebecca realized that the next 24 hours would determine the entire course of her family's future. The stakes had never been higher, and the choice had never been more difficult. But for the first time in months, she wasn't facing the crisis alone. Whatever she decided, she knew that Marcus would be standing beside her, ready to fight for the family they had accidentally created together. That knowledge gave her strength, even as it made the decision ahead of her all the more complex and consequential. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the oak trees, painting the cabin in warm golden light that made everything look peaceful and hopeful. Rebecca stood on the porch for a moment, gathering her courage for whatever lay ahead, while Cornelius settled himself nearby with the patient dignity of a guardian who would never abandon his post. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and life-changing decisions, but tonight she was home. Her children were safe, and for the first time in her adult life, she had someone willing to stand with her against whatever storms might come. It wasn't everything she had dreamed of, but it was more than she had ever dared to hope for. The question now was whether she was brave enough to reach out and claim it. The morning of the social services visit dawned clear and cold, with frost covering the pastures like scattered diamonds. Rebecca had barely slept, her mind cycling through every possible scenario for how the day might unfold. She had spent the previous evening preparing the cabin until it gleamed, organizing documentation of her employment and living situation, and rehearsing answers to questions she imagined Patricia Valdez might ask. Marcus had been quietly supportive throughout her preparations, offering practical suggestions without pressuring her for an answer to his proposal. The question hung between them like morning mist, present but unaddressed, while they focused on the immediate crisis at hand. Rebecca had called Patricia Valdez first thing yesterday morning, providing the ranch address and agreeing to a 10 o'clock visit. The social worker had been professionally courteous but non-committal, explaining the evaluation process in terms that made Rebecca's stomach knot with anxiety. Home inspection, interviews with both Rebecca and Marcus, assessment of the children's health and development, review of financial stability and support systems. Standing in her kitchen now, feeding David and Sophie their breakfast while Cornelius kept watch from his usual spot by the window, Rebecca tried to project the calm confidence of a mother who had nothing to hide. The twins were particularly cheerful this morning, as if sensing the importance of the day and wanting to be on their best behavior. A soft knock at the cabin door made Rebecca's heart rate spike, though she knew it was too early for the social worker. Marcus entered at her invitation, carrying a steaming mug of coffee and wearing the kind of determined expression she had learned to associate with his most serious moods. "How are you holding up?" "Terrified," Rebecca admitted, then immediately felt guilty for the confession. "I know I shouldn't be. The children are healthy and happy, we have a good home here, and you've been incredibly generous with your support." But government agencies have their own way of looking at things. Marcus nodded grimly. I've had dealings with bureaucrats before. They mean well, mostly, but they're trained to look for problems rather than solutions. He paused, studying her face carefully. Rebecca, have you given any more thought to what we discussed yesterday? The proposal.
Had thought of little else, weighing the practical benefits against her emotional reservations, trying to separate her growing feelings for Marcus from the desperate need to protect her children. I have, she said slowly, but I keep coming back to the same concerns. Marriage should be about more than convenience or legal protection. Should be, Marcus agreed, but sometimes life forces us to make practical choices first and hope that everything else follows. He leaned forward, his blue eyes serious. I won't pretend this is a conventional romantic situation, but I will say that I care about you and the children more than I've cared about anything in years. Whatever develops between us personally, I know we could build something good together. Before Rebecca could respond, Cornelius suddenly straightened at the window, his head tilting in the alert posture that meant someone was approaching. Through the glass, Rebecca could see a silver sedan making its way up the ranch road, dust trailing behind it in the morning air. She's early, Rebecca said, her voice tight with renewed anxiety. Marcus stood immediately, his presence shifting into protective mode. Remember, you're not on trial here. You're a good mother providing excellent care for your children in a safe, stable environment. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Patricia Valdez turned out to be a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She greeted Rebecca with professional warmth, introduced herself to Marcus with polite curiosity, and appeared genuinely startled when Cornelius approached to inspect the newcomer with his usual dignity. That's quite a welcoming committee, Patricia observed, watching as the turkey completed his assessment and returned to his post near the cabin steps. Cornelius takes his guardian duty seriously, Rebecca explained, feeling some of her tension ease at the social worker's amused reaction. He's very protective of the children. The inspection began with a tour of the cabin, Patricia noting the cleanliness and organization, the safety measures Rebecca had implemented for infant care, and the obvious signs of a functioning household. She asked practical questions about heating, electricity, water quality, and emergency access, all of which Marcus was able to answer with the confidence of someone who knew his property thoroughly. David and Sophie were examined next, Patricia's professional demeanor softening as she interacted with the twins. Both children were alert and responsive, showing none of the signs of neglect or distress that might have triggered concern. David charmed the social worker with his ready smiles, while Sophie demonstrated her developing motor skills by grasping Patricia's offered finger with surprising strength. "They're beautiful children," Patricia said sincerely as she completed her assessment. "Healthy weight, good muscle tone, age-appropriate development. It's clear they're receiving excellent care." Rebecca felt a surge of relief, though she knew the evaluation was far from over. The hardest part would be the interview, where Patricia would probe into Rebecca's background, her support systems, and her long-term plans for providing stability. They settled in the cabin's living room for the formal discussion, Marcus positioned slightly behind Rebecca in a show of support that didn't go unnoticed by the social worker. Patricia consulted her notes and began with standard questions about Rebecca's employment, income, and childcare arrangements. "I understand you're working as a ranch hand and veterinary assistant. How do you manage your responsibilities while caring for infant twins?" Rebecca had prepared for this question, but she still felt her pulse quicken. "Mr. Whitfield has been very accommodating about flexible scheduling. I'm able to bring the children with me during most work activities, and when that's not possible, he's available to help with supervision." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly at this arrangement. "Mr. Whitfield, you're comfortable with this level of involvement in child care? That's quite a responsibility for an employer to assume." Marcus spoke for the first time since the formal interview had begun, his voice steady and confident. "Ms. Valdez, I don't think of Rebecca as just an employee.
She and the children have become part of this ranch family. I care about their welfare as much as I do any member of my household." "I see," Patricia said, making notes that Rebecca couldn't read from her angle. "And what are your long-term plans, Miss Chen? Is this arrangement intended to be permanent?" This was the moment Rebecca had dreaded, the question that would force her to reveal either her uncertainty about the future or her dependence on Marcus's continued goodwill. She took a breath, preparing to navigate the delicate balance between honesty and self-preservation. Before she could speak, Marcus cleared his throat quietly. "Actually, Ms. Valdez, Rebecca and I have been discussing making our arrangement more permanent, more official." "How so?" Marcus met Rebecca's eyes for a moment, asking a silent question. When she gave an almost imperceptible nod, he continued, "We're planning to be married. We've been building a partnership here that goes beyond employer and employee, and we want to formalize our commitment to each other and to the children." The announcement hung in the air like a bell that had been rung, impossible to take back once spoken. Rebecca felt her heart racing as she processed what Marcus had just done, the way he had stepped forward to claim a future that she hadn't yet agreed to accept. Patricia's expression shifted to something that might have been approval mixed with professional caution. "That's quite a development. When are you planning this marriage?" "Soon," Marcus said firmly. "Within the next few weeks. We see no reason to delay once we've made the decision." "And Miss Chen, are you comfortable with this arrangement? You don't feel pressured or coerced in any way?" Patricia asked, her attention focusing sharply on Rebecca. Rebecca looked at Marcus, seeing in his face the quiet strength that had first attracted her, the genuine caring that had grown between them over the past month, and the promise of a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. The practical benefits were undeniable, but more than that, she realized that her feelings for him had evolved far beyond gratitude or convenience. "I'm very comfortable with it," she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "Marcus has been incredibly supportive of me and the children. We work well together, we share similar values, and I believe we can build a good life as a family." Patricia made more notes, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Whitfield, are you prepared to take on legal responsibility for David and Sophie, to become their stepfather in every sense of the word?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied without hesitation. "I've already grown to love those children as if they were my own. Formalizing that relationship would be a privilege, not a burden." The interview continued for another hour, covering topics from financial planning to emergency procedures to Rebecca's support system in the community. Throughout it all, Marcus remained a steady presence beside her, answering questions about the ranch operation, demonstrating his commitment to the family unit they were proposing to create. When Patricia finally closed her notebook and prepared to leave, her demeanor had shifted from professional skepticism to something approaching warmth. "Miss Chen, I have to say that this is one of the most positive home evaluations I've conducted in recent memory. Your children are clearly thriving, your living situation is stable and proper, and your support system appears to be strong." She stood, gathering her materials with efficient movements. "I'll be submitting my report recommending that this case be closed with no further action required. The original concerns about your ability to provide adequate care have been thoroughly addressed." Rebecca felt tears of relief as the weight of months of worry suddenly lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you for taking the time to see the reality of our situation." Patricia smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she had shown since arriving. "It's my job to protect children, Miss Chen, but it's also my job to recognize when families are functioning well and should be left alone to thrive. You've created something good here." As they walked Patricia to her car, Cornelius performed his usual farewell inspection, earning another amused comment from the social worker about the ranch's unique welcoming committee. When the sedan disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust, Rebecca found herself standing beside Marcus in the sudden quiet of victory. "We did it," she said softly, hardly daring to believe that the crisis was really over. "You did it," Marcus corrected. You faced down a system that was designed to doubt you, and you proved that you're exactly the mother your children deserve. Rebecca turned to face him fully, knowing that the moment had come to address what he had declared during the interview. Marcus, what you told Patricia about marriage, did you mean it, or were you just trying to help with the evaluation? Marcus's expression grew serious as he considered his answer. I meant every word. Rebecca, I know this isn't the way these things usually happen. There should be courtship and romance and probably a ring that costs more than my truck. But what I feel for you is real, and what we could build together as a family is worth more than any conventional timeline. He reached out to take her hands, his touch gentle but firm. I'm not asking you to love me tomorrow or even next month. I'm asking you to trust me with your future, to believe that what we have here is worth protecting and growing. The rest can develop naturally. Rebecca looked into his eyes and saw not just kindness or desire, but genuine partnership. A man who had stood beside her through crisis, who had claimed her children as his own without hesitation, who offered not just security, but the possibility of building something lasting together. Yes, she said, the word emerging with surprising strength. Yes, I'll marry you. Marcus's face lit up with a joy so pure that it took her breath away. Before she could second-guess herself, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close while Cornelius gobbled his approval from nearby. We'll do this right, Marcus promised against her hair. A real wedding, a real partnership, a real family. David and Sophie will grow up knowing they're wanted and loved and secure. 3 weeks later, on a crisp November morning, with the last of the autumn leaves dancing in the breeze, Rebecca Chen became Rebecca Whitfield in a simple ceremony at the county courthouse. David and Sophie, dressed in matching outfits that Marcus had insisted on purchasing, served as the world's youngest wedding party, while Cornelius waited patiently in the truck outside. The marriage license made everything official, but the real transformation had happened gradually over the weeks of planning and preparation. Marcus had moved Rebecca's belongings into the main house, converting one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery that could accommodate both twins as they grew. He had also surprised her with adoption papers, formally requesting to become David and Sophie's legal father. They deserved to have the same last name as their mother, he had explained when she found the documents on the kitchen table. And I want it on record that I choose to be their parent, not just their stepfather. The marriage night was awkward at first, both of them uncertain about the physical boundaries of their practical arrangement. But as they sat together on the porch after the children were asleep, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars emerge over the ranch, the conversation flowed naturally toward hopes and dreams for their future. I never thought I'd have children, Marcus admitted. Emma and I tried for years, but it never happened. When I found you in the smokehouse with David and Sophie, it felt like the universe was giving me a second chance at the family I'd always wanted. Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, feeling more relaxed than she had in months. I never thought I'd find someone who would want all of us, complications and all, the twins, Cornelius, the whole chaotic package. Especially Cornelius, Marcus said with a chuckle. I've never seen a turkey with such strong opinions about ranch management. As if summoned by his name, Cornelius appeared from his evening patrol, settling himself on the porch steps where he could maintain watch over their extended family. The sight of the turkey standing guard over their new life struck Rebecca as the perfect symbol of how unexpected blessings could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Cedar Valley Ranch in snow that transformed the landscape into a crystalline wonderland. Rebecca discovered that she loved the seasonal rhythms of ranch life, the way the work adapted to weather and animal needs, the satisfying routine of caring for creatures who depended on her knowledge and dedication. David and Sophie thrived in their new environment, developing the sturdy health that came from fresh air and active lives. David showed early signs of fascination with the animals, while Sophie demonstrated a quiet intelligence that suggested she would be as equally at home with books or livestock. The marriage itself evolved gradually from practical partnership into something deeper and more intimate. Marcus proved to be patient and considerate, never pushing for more than Rebecca was ready to give, while she discovered that trust could indeed grow into love when nurtured with kindness and respect. By spring, when the first calves were born and the pastures turned green again, Rebecca could hardly remember the desperate woman who had once slept in a smokehouse with her babies and a protective turkey. That person felt like someone from a different life, someone who had existed before she learned that home could be built from the most unexpected materials. Standing in the barn one morning, watching Marcus teach 18-month-old David how to pet a gentle cow while Sophie observed from her carrier, and Cornelius supervised the entire interaction, Rebecca felt a deep contentment settle in her chest. This was what happiness looked like, not the dramatic passion of movies or novels, but the quiet satisfaction of belonging somewhere, of being needed and valued and loved. The smokehouse still stood at the edge of the property, weathered and dignified in its retirement from active use. Sometimes Rebecca walked past it during her evening chores, remembering the fear and desperation that had driven her to seek shelter there, the uncertainty that had characterized those dark months of her life. But more often, she thought of it as the place where her real story had begun, the place where she had been found by a man who chose to see possibility rather than problems, who had offered sanctuary and discovered family in return. Cornelius still patrolled the area regularly, as if acknowledging the debt they all owed to that humble building where three lost souls had found each other. The turkey's soft gobbles continued to serve as lullabies for David and Sophie, a sound that spoke of protection and continuity and the strange ways that love could manifest in the world. And sometimes, when the wind was just right and the evening light slanted through the oak trees at the perfect angle, Rebecca could swear she heard an echo of that first gentle sound that had announced their arrival at Cedar Valley Ranch, a sound that said, without words, that they were home at last.